Man, religion, the source of the word religion is this. It's actually got a Latin root. The word re means a return to, and ligare is where we get our word ligament, which binds things together. And so it's a return to bondage. That's essentially the meaning of religion. And so, Paul even warns against religion. He says, if you've died with Christ, why do you submit to rules like you're from the world or something? I mean, do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These have an appearance of wisdom, but they lack any value in restraining you. And he calls it self-made religion. And so there's this idea that, yes, we're free from the law, but we still need our Christian principles, we'll call them, which they really come down to being Christian rules. And they're man-made. And they set a standard. And the reason we want a standard is because then we can measure ourselves, and then we can see if we're okay. And you know what that's called? That's called righteousness. And we don't get it through measuring ourselves up against standards and performing. What we've got subtly is a works righteousness. Because righteousness comes from Christ, not from obedience. Obedience can flow from already knowing our righteousness. But when we get the cart before the horse, that's where we've messed up the whole thing, and we've got a little bit of Jesus for heaven and a whole lot of religion for now.
The religious spirit is substituting anything for relationship. If you can have a relationship with God, substituting like I was at a movement one time that they thought they were the center of the world. But nobody really knew the main leaders, and the main leaders didn't know how to be known. And so they would get in the know about what was going on with the leadership, and that's how they felt like, I know what's happening with the pastor's son, so I'm really close to the family because he includes me in information, but there's no real relationship. Informing is not partnering. And so religious spirit is anything that substitutes relationship with God or with each other, and taking all relational authority and accountability out and putting in more of an administrative or structural authority and relationship.
I wrote a book called Repenting of Religion. And in that book, I basically argue that religion is, I think, the antithesis of the kingdom of God. And the reason is basically this. In the garden, there was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and Adam and Eve were told to eat of they could eat of the tree of life, but they were supposed to abstain from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we've got a provision there, the provision of life, and you have a prohibition, the prohibition on eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then I just asked the question, why was it called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? What I argue in Repenting of Religion is that what that term means is that we get to define for ourselves what is good and evil. We want to play the role of God as judge. God, it was telling us, trust me for life, but don't try to be like me in terms of what you think you know. I judge good and evil, you don't. And the reason why that's so foundational is because I don't think we can do two at the same time. God can love and be a judge at the same time, but I don't think human beings can. To love is to ascribe to another unsurpassable worth. To judge is to detract worth from them. I would define love as if Jesus Christ is the model of what love is, then love is about me being willing to ascribe unsurpassable worth to you at cost to myself. That's what Jesus does. You are worth this, and I show it by how I sacrifice for you. That's the essence of love. Judgment, which is what religion is all about, I argue, is the opposite of that. I detract worth from you to benefit myself. However imperfect I may be, at least I'm not like you. And so I feed off of this contrast. Religion has, as I define it, is, and there's always a lot of course, issues surrounding it, like what's the definition of religion? And so you just have to land on one and go with it. But I define religion as a system of beliefs and behaviors that people engage in for the purpose of feeling like they have life, feeling like they're special before God or the gods, feeling like they're somehow unique, a unique people of destiny. It's a tribal thing. And so we are the people who believe all the right things as opposed to those people who believe the wrong things. And we're the people who behave in all the right ways as opposed to those people who behave in all the wrong ways. And while we may not be perfect, we're maybe sinners that need forgiveness, our sins are minor compared to their sins, which are major. They have the deal breaker sins. And so we feed off of them in this contrast. And and we're the special people of God because of that. That is, I believe, the essence of the fall. And what the Christian religion does, insofar as it's manifesting this religious spirit, is it preaches the fall as though it was a form of salvation. You come join us, and now you can be a part of the tribe that believes the right things and does the right things, as opposed to the people who believe the wrong things and do the wrong things. We're called, I believe, to get all of our life, our worth, our significance from Jesus Christ alone, not from how right we are or how good we are. It's okay to be right. Be right. Of course, everything you believe, you believe you're right. You wouldn't believe it otherwise. But you can't get life from that. And you live a godly life. Yes, but we can't get life from that. Worth, significance. All of our life should be gotten from Jesus Christ. And see, if all my life is from Jesus Christ, if all my worth and value and security and what makes life worth living, if that is anchored in what God thinks about me as determined by Calvary, then I no longer have any need whatsoever to compare myself with anybody or to contrast myself with anybody. You only do that when you're walking around hungry. You know, when you gotta feed your soul. It's like now you want to feel like you're better or smarter than somebody else. But when you get it all from Christ, you can let go of that. And now, but only now, are you in a capacity where you can love freely and unconditionally. Where now I can ascribe worth to you at cost to myself. Because I no longer need to be detracting worth from you to benefit myself. And so I think the kingdom and religion are absolutely antithetical. The kingdom is all about the reign of God, where people get life through the person of Jesus Christ. The spirit of religion is always just that spirit that wants, it's a spirit of tribalism, self-righteousness, where we are the holy club, the righteous club, as opposed to those other folks. This is why, and this is, I think, a really good litmus test to see how we're doing as a people, we Jesus followers, is to ask the question, are you attracting or repelling prostitutes and tax collectors? Or basically the two most judged groups in society, because those were the two most judged groups in first century Judaism. And see, the holiness of the Pharisees repelled them, because the holiness of the Pharisees was a self-righteous holiness. They were the tribe that thought that they believed all the right things and they did all the right things, in contrast to all those who don't do the right things and believe the right things. And no group is worse than the prostitutes and the tax collectors. So they fed off the prostitutes and tax collectors. I mean, they felt righteous in contrast to them, which is why the prostitutes and the tax collectors didn't want to hang out with them. Who wants to feed off of someone who's going to be a parasite? Really, and religion is parasitic. It has to feed off of somebody because it's not getting its life from Christ. But see, Jesus was the one true sinless person on the planet. And the prostitutes and the tax collectors gravitated towards him. They wanted to hang out with him. And see, he had a righteousness that wasn't parasitic. He didn't have to feed off anybody. He didn't have to contrast with anybody. I'm sure that they knew that he didn't approve of everything they did. But you see, his holiness was the holiness of the character of the Father. His holiness was a holiness of self-sacrificial love. They knew on some level that when they're around this guy, Jesus Christ, they felt like they had a worth they didn't have other places. There's something about being around him that they felt loved. They felt accepted. They most were themselves around him. He communicated worth to them instead of sucking worth off of them. I think a kingdom holiness attracts sinners. Partly because those who are in the kingdom would be saying with Paul, we're the chief of sinners. I'm in no position to judge anybody. Man, I'm the chief of sinners. That should be the attitude of all kingdom people. Why would I go looking for a dust particle in your eye when I got a tree trunk sticking out of my own eye? Matthew 7, 1 through 3. That's a kingdom mindset. And so that kind of holiness, which means uniqueness, distinctness, set apartness, that's all the word holiness means. It attracts sinners because it has life. I've come that you might have abundant life. As we get our life from Christ, people sniff that out and they come. Religion is the opposite. Religion is here sucking life off of people. It's just, we are not like you. We're not perfect maybe, but at least we're not like you. And then we judge those folks, and that doesn't communicate the character of the Father at all.
Religious spirit wants punishment. Some measure of punishment. It was the religious spirit that had the priests the Pharisees with stones in their hand wanted to kill the woman caught in adultery. The political spirit was Pilate washing his hands to distance himself. Both deal, you can tell whether you got a political spirit in the church or a religious spirit by just throwing a controversy in the middle of the group. If they want to wash their hands, that's the political spirit. If they want to bring judgment, that's the religious spirit. See, I will show you my intensity of my commitment to holiness by judging this, or by washing my hands because I don't want to be associated with that person. Both are counterfeits. It's different than the kingdom. See, and Jesus warned against that spirit too. He warned against it when he said, be careful of the leaven of Herod, the political spirit, and the leaven of the Pharisees. It's those two mindsets that are the poison, that which wars against the mindset of the kingdom. Kingdom is different. Jesus is right there with the woman caught in adultery. His interest wasn't my image. What are people going to think? That wasn't his image. The interest was, here's a person that's redeemable. And he wasn't going to get her turned around through judgment.
Well, I think religion can be like an orphan spirit. You know, it can just be where people just don't get it. They just don't get the whole picture of their identity. And if you're religion, a lot of people try to jostle for position and make God out to be in their image, to try to make him like they think he should be, to kind of create this picture that he is something that's in their mind, whether it be whatever kind of religion it is. In Christian religion, people have often, emphasized the judgment and not seen the grace. But yeah, it's just a frightening thing when people get a religious spirit. It's continues rules and rules and rules. But see, when you're in love, nobody needs, say you love your husband, nobody needs to say, don't commit adultery. Why would you commit adultery if you're in love with your husband? When you're in love with God, nobody has to say to you, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, because you're in love with him. And you're so in love with him that you don't want to do anything to displease him. God is holy. Don't ever misunderstand that. God is holy and pure, and he hates sin. He absolutely hates it. He does not want sin in anyone's life, and it's not a wimpy grace. It's not like, oh, do anything, Daddy loves you. Daddy loves you, but he loves you enough to call you to holiness. And that kind of holiness comes from the heart of the Father to your heart, and you feel the heart of the Father, and you choose to walk in righteousness. And so you choose to step into your adoption, and you want to please Father. It's not an effort and a push and I'm just a hideous, horrible thing, but I'm going to try to do something. No, you're changed. You're transformed. You're in love. And you don't need to be religious anymore. You're just full of God.
So it's people that can love worship services. They can love church life. They can love the study of the Bible. But there is a fortress that actually keeps God out of the heart and keeps us from really changing. And so the religious spirit has a great deal of pride in it, a great deal of religious pride. Basically, it's worshiping the image of a holy person that's never existed and never will exist.
So how do we overcome it? Because it's nasty.
It's hard. And it takes a miracle and to overcome it. Jesus' response in Matthew 15 was leave them alone. I think there's a line we cross in that service of the religious spirit that we don't get back from. I mean, the Son of God says, leave them alone. And they didn't receive their own Messiah when he came. That's how powerful that religious spirit is. So being real, loving people, praying for people, but it's stronger than alcoholism. It's stronger than cocaine addiction. And you can't control someone else's alcoholism. You can't control their religiosity. All you can do is pray for them and love them. Only God can break the power of that addiction. It's like a religious addiction. And anybody that contradicts it or contradicts your group, you kick them out. You guard your religiosity. You don't admit anything in that could threaten it.
Like, to me, there are levels of evil spirits. Like Jesus said, if you cast a spirit out of a person, and you don't, basically fill it with the Lord, right? That person doesn't get filled with the Lord. 7 spirits more evil than the first will return. In my mind, the most wicked spirit on the planet is the religious spirit. It wasn't the spirit of pornography. It wasn't the spirit of molestation or the spirit of murder that put Jesus on the cross. It was a religious spirit. And to me, the religious spirit masquerades as an angel of light in that it pretends to have a relationship with God. It's the second tree in the garden. It's the tree of good and evil. There's a tree of life, and there's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And it's interesting that the devil encouraged Eve, even though he's evil, he's willing to give them discernment about him being evil, about the serpent being evil, if they don't have to have a relationship with God to know it. So what does the tree of knowledge of good and evil do? It gives you information without relationship. So in my mind, it's man, the religious spirit is rooted in man trying to be righteous outside of a relationship with God. And it persecutes anything that looks like a relationship with God, and probably just as importantly, it becomes another set of rules. And I think the religious spirit can take on lots of different faces. For instance, in our culture, we have a Signs and Wonders school, a Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry with 1,300 students in it. And my concern in our culture is that doing the works of Jesus, in other words, healing the sick, casting out demons, prophesying, for instance, that can just be another way I perform. Jesus said that some will come to me and say, didn't we, cast out demons? Didn't we prophesy? Didn't we do all these things? And he said, I never knew you. So, I look at our culture and I'm like, okay, I heal the sick, I cast out demons, I do all this stuff. It's like, okay, that's awesome. Listen, that's awesome. But that can be another way of performing. That can actually turn into a Pharisaical way of performing. Like, now I do these righteous, I used to feed the poor, I used to tithe, I used to do all these things so that people could see I'm righteous. Now I pray for the sick, now I prophesy, and it's like, okay, the question is, do you know Jesus? And the most important question is, does he know you?
It's one of my favorite topics, and I have a huge disagreement with the standard definition of it.
Let me hear the
And the standard definition of a religious spirit, in my opinion, when I hear it said among our young people, is upholding a standard. If you uphold a standard, it's religious. Completely wrong definition. Upholding a standard is not what the definition of religious spirit is. Jesus upheld lots of standards. It's the spirit in which they uphold the standard. It's not the standard itself. That's one thing, although that's not the main thing, because I don't find many people are holding standards up. That's not really what's happening the last 5 years in the body of Christ in the Western world. Not much. A little bit. But that's 1% of the body of Christ. Most people are not doing that. I mean, here at IHOP, anywhere. That's not really what's happening in a major way. The main way people talk about a religious spirit is they talk about any kind of consistent behavior that you're committed to. If you're committed to a certain kind of lifestyle behavior in a regular way, which the Bible calls discipline, most people call that religious, and that's a completely wrong definition, because a religious spirit is not what you do, it's the motive in which you do it. And if you will say no to certain things and yes to other things that are discipline, but you do it because you're loved instead of trying to get loved, it's called grace. If you're doing it to earn love, it's called religious spirit. And if you do it and you're critical of other people that don't do it, instead of grateful for having the inspiration that you do it, that's religious. And so, to say it again, if you have a certain discipline in your life, you have certain restraints that you live by and certain things you give yourself to, whether you have the feel or not, and you do it because God loves you, not to earn God's love, and you're grateful for the inspiration instead of critical to the others who don't have it, you're being moved by grace. But you have predictable, regular things happening in your life you do without even feeling like doing it. Like, I don't ever feel like working out, but I work out somewhat regularly. I'm glad my wife is not here as we get the whole truth. But I don't feel like it lots of times. I pray lots of times I don't feel like it. I set times aside, I pray, and lots of times I don't feel inspired. And a lot of times in the midst of it, I get inspired. And other times I don't get inspired. But I have found, looking back years later, if I have consistent patterns built into my life, and I'm not trying to earn God's love, I'm not critical for people who don't, but grateful that I'm inspired to stay with it, and I'm doing it because I feel loved, I find more times than not, I end up putting myself in the way of more and more encounter. But most people that talk about religious spirit talk about anything that's consistent behavior regularly, and they don't feel like it when they're doing it. That's religious. And what they want to do is live a flesh lifestyle. They want to do what they feel like doing and feel good about it. And that's a rip-off to them if they're affirmed that that's the best way to live. It's the cancer, it's the doctor who knows about cancer. You know, it's the guy saying that's the better way to live. 10 years later, you won't be further in your spiritual development. You'll actually be further back, not further forward. So that's a rip-off, though it's a positive presentation of the preacher, but it does not help the kid.
When I moved to LA, God spoke to me, and I'm pretty, I think, not religious to a degree, meaning like I have relationships with drug addicts, and I have relationships with, you know, homeless people, and I have relationships to like people that not everybody would be friends with, and I've always gone after the underdog, but I've also had really balanced friends, so I don't sacrifice my good relationships to go after underdogs. But at the same time, when I moved to LA, God spoke to me and said, I'm going to go to a lot of places, but you're too religious to go there. And I didn't know what he meant, so I said, you got to teach me like how to become unreligious. And I really started, like, I read the gospel again just organically over, you know, the last 4 years, and I would see things like Jesus going to the Samaritan woman at the well who was illegal to meet with. You know, the woman at the well was literally illegal for him to meet with, and he goes to her and is like, hey, let's spend time together. Let me tell you who I am. I want to hear who you are. You know, and prophesies over it. I'm sure the disciples were coming up like, Jesus, trying to rescue him, you know, because that's how we rescue our leaders from bad situations. And he's hanging out with a woman who's like living with a guy who's not even her husband. And that's a bad appearance of evil on that whole situation, because most leaders won't even be alone in a room with a person, and he's with a woman who'd be like equivalent nowadays to being like a pedophile in a room locked away alone who would be attracted to you. I mean, it'd just be like the weirdest situation. And so I was like, okay, I'm seeing you in a different light. Or the woman who had the issue of blood and touches Jesus, and that's illegal for her to touch a rabbi at that point. And he says, who touches me? And she's ready for the ball to drop, like, how dare you? And he turns around and goes, hey, your faith has healed you. You made a huge risk by doing something that was illegal and wrong, unethically wrong in the Jewish culture, but I love you for it. And it's huge. And so I'm like looking at it going, where are you going to have us go? And so we started getting invited to some places, like we were invited to different house parties, and there's cocaine lines in the bathroom. We're getting there going, why are we here? And you can't just go like, I'm on a mission. Like, I have Christian friends who are like, you can't enjoy yourself in those places. You just go there and you have to be totally neutral and not participate. But if you're totally neutral and you don't give your heart to people, then there's no authentic love being given. So there has to be a place in you that says, I love these people and I'm here for them and I'm here for real and I'm not better than them. And I'm not, just because I have a revelation of God that they may not have doesn't mean that it's an us and them scenario. It's actually, we're all one. It's all us. We're all his kids. It's just that I know it. And so I'm here to love and, you know, participate with them, not just to be on, I'm not team neutral. I'm team like God who loves these people and who would be here too. And so, you know, obviously we didn't go to places where we'd have temptation, but I'm pretty boring. I've never been drunk and I've never done drugs. And so for me to go in there, I've never had sex. So for me to go in there, it wasn't like I was going to fall instantly. So, you know, bring crews, and we'd go to, you know, some of our people went to the Playboy Mansion to minister, you know, and pray for some of the people during a film shoot. We've been to, you know, some porn setups. We've been to New Age fairs. We've been to places that people don't typically go to. And I used to be like, the first New Age fair I went to, some New Agers, after we'd prophesy or pray for them, they'd want to prophesy and pray back for us to whatever God they serve. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to get cursed, you know. And I'm like, wait, I have to come to a place of agreement with what they say for this to have any power. So I don't care. They're trying to love me back because I just gave them love. And they're bringing the best of what they know back to me. And I cannot reject them in that. And at the same time, I can tell them like that, just thank you for making an effort, but the effort's not like, it's not ministering to me like I just minister to them. But at the same time, how awesome is that they're trying to give back from the only place they know how? And if we reject that, we're actually rejecting love. But we can reject the words, but as far as rejecting them, participation, like people want to participate with us, and Christians don't allow anybody to participate with them at all, unless they're pure, unless they're, And so I realized, like, I had what I call my tribe of lost boys, which is boys and girls, men and women who aren't walking with God at all and are totally like making bad decisions. And we've created, like, at my house on Sundays, for a long time, we've done like pool parties or whatever, and just a group of people come over for a conversation and for just to hang out and feel loved, and we don't have to have a meaningful conversation the whole time. They can just come, and it's a safe zone where they know they're not going to get hurt, and that we don't allow dysfunctional drama to come in. But that doesn't mean we also like preach the gospel radically either in those meetings, because some of these guys are like famous movie or musicians, famous movie stars or musicians or whatever, or they're quasi-famous, or they've been burnt, or they've been destroyed. And so it's like they don't need a pastor to come in and pastor them right now. They just need an on-ramp. And so I've learned to be an on-ramp to things to people in the midst of things that I would never have participated with before, to go to a club and hang out at a club and actually have a good time. Like, I'm not just going to a club and going, I hate going to clubs, but I like reaching people. And I'm like, I actually like the music and I like going to a club. I don't like to participate with the full gamut of what other people participate, but I choose how I manage my freedom there. And they're choosing how they manage their freedom. I'm not responsible for their bad management. I'm responsible for me. And so one story to illustrate that, I was sitting with, we had a pastor's daughter, we have a lot of pastors' kids in our church. And one of the pastor's daughters, we're at a restaurant where a lot of Christians hang out at. Christians in the entertainment industry hang out there, and there happened to be 2 tables of Christian leaders in the entertainment industry sitting next to us. And she didn't know at first, and then they came up and introduced themselves to us. And she and her husband were sitting there talking to me. They were telling me their story, and they'd been through it, man. Unfortunately, their parents being in ministry had been really bad for them, and their parents had sacrificed them at the altar of ministry, and they knew it, and they'd all talked about it. And so she's been really. She'd gone through a period where she just hated the church. She loved God, but she hated Christians. And she was trying to figure out how to love again, how to open her heart again, because she hated all that. So she goes, Christians are a bunch of assholes. And she's saying all this stuff, and all of a sudden she realizes she cussed, and there's 2 tables of Christians, and I'm a pastor. And she's like, I'm so sorry, I'm going to ruin your reputation. And I start laughing, and I go, you never have to manage my reputation. Why would you manage my reputation? I'm not the one who's offended and cussing and angry. I'm just spending time with you. I love you. They should expect that I love people of all types. And if your cussing puts my reputation in a bad light, I don't want to be a minister. Because the reality is I should be hanging out with people that look all kinds of ways without suspicion and craziness towards me, because you're who God came for. And I'm really sorry that you feel like you had to manage my reputation with me. Did you feel like that with your parents? And she breaks down weeping. And the core of what she's been disenfranchised to the Christianity with was she feels like she's always performing to be right in people's eyes, as opposed to having authentic relationship. And so for me to say, you participate in a relationship how you want to, I'm not going to dictate how you do it. I'll put up the boundaries I need to be safe, but that doesn't make me unsafe. And she just immediately didn't have to manage my reputation for me, got healed, and now she's walking radically with God, doing great stuff. But it took her that deliverance,
Listen, I'm like 7 years old in God. It was all about me. And the tendency of this situation is, if we don't surrender and lay it down, it's still all about us. Jesus said, you're either for me or against me, you gather or you scatter. This thing is about a life surrendered, a life laid down. You can't overcome the enemy except by the blood of the Lamb, the word of your testimony. It's Revelation 12:11. Unless you love your life not unto death, you can't do this thing. It's all about sold out, man. All you've got to do is sell out and give me your life. This thing's a radical call. It's not just go to church and have good programs, man. It's not just, I'm going to church today. Wow, wasn't church fun? Man, it's about being the church. It's about being loved. This whole thing's about love. If we can't be loved, what the heck do people want with our life? Why would they want to be around us? If we can't be loved, what do we really got? When God says He's love, Jesus is the visible image of the invisible God, Colossians 1:15. Hebrews 1:3, Jesus is the express image of the Father. If God is love, then Jesus was the visible image of the invisible God, which is love. If God is love, and Jesus is the express image of love. And in John 14, when they were like, show us the Father and it'll be sufficient, Jesus is like, the Father's love. And he said, have I been with you so long and you don't know me? Jesus is love, and when they saw him, they saw love, they saw the Father. And we're supposed to walk like that. It's all about walking in love, man. These Muslims that came up, I wasn't trying to grab them and say, you need to pray this. They were trying to debate with me. And I would let them finish. And I would say, yeah, you're amazing. And I would prophesy, and I would share the reality of their heart. I didn't need to attack them and say, I'm right and you're wrong. Christians are so going after them, trying to strong-arm people into getting them to pray a prayer. Jesus never said, go get people to pray a prayer. He said, become love. He said, give up your life, surrender. Unless you lose your life for me, you'll never have it. He who loses his life will find it. Come on, it's all about surrender. When I see somebody, I'm not looking at them saying, this is what's wrong. I'm going to go point it out. I'm going to show them their sin. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to talk them into praying my prayer and getting them on my team. It's become a numbers game. And we have a love for souls instead of a love for people. And that's twisted, man. Come on, the gospel's real simple. Deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow him. There's a lot of people carrying their cross that haven't denied themselves. Man, conviction should be gripping your heart right now. This thing's about surrender. It's about a radical lifestyle of love, one that the world has never seen. My whole family that was totally against me, my wife for 8 months wouldn't shop with me. Then she broke and said, this is God. This is God. Who am I to fight against God? My whole family, one by one, are coming to Christ. Why? Because I never allowed their sin against me to produce sin in me. That's powerful, man. Why are we being pottered and molded by the world when God says that we're supposed to be pottered by him and molded and squeezed? Man, when you squeeze an orange, what kind of juice comes out? Orange juice. When you squeeze an apple, what kind of juice comes out? Apple juice. If I squeeze an orange into a cup and you drink it and it's apple juice, wouldn't you be freaked out? Would you? Why isn't it strange that when Christians get squeezed, everything but Jesus comes out? Come on, it's because we haven't laid it down, dude. It's all about laying it down. Let's get radical, man. Let's love people. It's really big. You think you got to seal the deal and get them to pray your prayer. Come on, I'm going in for the jugular vein, and then you get a soul saved. Then you go back and tell your brother, I got 2 souls saved. How many did you get you? It's become a numbers game. It's not a numbers game, dude. Holy Spirit is huge. He's like a big boy. He's well able to land on everything. We're a sower. We're a waterer. You don't bring increase. God brings